So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fourth in the M chapter series of presentations with a variety of speakers. Today we have Simon Lord from Redux joining us. Simon is a former British Army officer, and his goal, his project, if you like, is his raison d'etre at this point is to take the E30 M3, arguably the most iconic of all BMW M cars, and to imagine if BMW was still building that car today, if they'd never stopped building it in 1992, and if they'd kept building it, what would the E30 M3 look like now? So just as Singer famously does that with 964 generation 911s and maintains that that historic architecture, but turns them into an exquisite creation using the very latest of materials and technologies. And Eagle, for example, does the same sort of thing with Jaguar E-Types in the UK. Then Simon is working on doing exactly that with the E30 M3. The first car has been delivered last year, excuse me, 2019, we're already in 2021, and Redux 2 is due to be delivered later this year, and should be available to be seen in the United States at the Monterey Car Week, assuming that that takes place as scheduled. Just a few presentation notes on or meeting notes for today. Simon will be talking for approximately 45 minutes. So at the conclusion of that, we'll have a Q&A session. So I encourage you, if you have any questions, we'd like to ask those questions, please put those into the chat window, and I will act as the moderator to field those questions to Simon, and we'll try and answer as many as we have time for. Additionally, I'd just like to quickly introduce the fellow members of the M chapter board. In addition to myself as president, Esteban Valentin is the vice president of the chapter. Esteban has a really sweet M2 competition, which we just learned is putting down close to 540 horsepower at the rear wheels, thanks to some modifications. So pretty exciting car. And Eve Dolinsky is our treasurer. She's also been the contact person for setting up a lot of the sending out the invitations for this and other meetings, and has been effectively handling a large part of the social secretary role as we work to bring a chapter secretary on board. So Eve, thank you for your efforts in that regard. So with that said, well, it's an interesting time to be talking E30 M3s. For those of you who watch Bring a Trailer, an E30 M3 Sport Evo just sold for more than $250,000, which is some serious coin. Lovely car, but we were chatting about this the other day. Those were cars that used to sell for, in the UK, £18,000 or something like that back in the day, and now, gosh, there's a lot there. So the E30 M3 is obviously generating a lot of interest, and Simon knows that better than anybody else. So I'll pass the presentation over to him and let him introduce himself and his company Redux, so that we can learn about and get our orders in for the finest E30 M3 that the world has ever seen. So Simon, take it away.
Thanks, Martin, very kind. Thank you for everybody joining today. It's a privilege to be here. I've had a lot of support from CCA over the past few years, and very happy to kind of share with you a bit more of an insight into how Redux came about, a little bit about me, and dive a little bit deeper into car number 1 and number 2, which is well underway. So I'd just like to start by saying that there's nothing super top secret in today, but I would respectfully ask that you don't share any of the Redux photos or images that I'm going to share with you today. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is kind of take you back a little bit, just give you a bit more of an insight into my connection with BMW. And it really starts here back in 1985. So I was 11 years old at the time. It's mid-July 1985. My dad has just taken delivery of an E24 635 CSI. It's parked in our garage at home, and he's not able to drive it for a couple of weeks because it used to be that each year in the UK on the 1st of August, there was a new registration, and that's when you could drive. So this was sat on a C plate, which Martin should remember. And for me, it was an opportunity to kind of nip in and out of the garage, sit in the car, pretend that I was going to drive it, press all the buttons, much to my dad's annoyance and disgust. So that was really the start of my relationship with BMW. And for most of my dad's adult life, he's had BMW, up until very recently, where he had a 330 hybrid, which he's now swapped for a Mercedes hybrid, because the battery lasts a bit longer, you can get a few extra miles out of it. So obviously he and I are not talking anymore because I'm somewhat disgusted with the fact that he switched over to Mercedes at this stage. So for me, if we fast forward 10 years to 1995, I'm now 21, working in Manchester. I was heavily involved in the music scene in Manchester. So I was DJing, I was working in a recording studio, I'd done sound engineering, and I was also working part-time at a clothes shop. So this was the pre-social media days, and everything was done by word of mouth or flyers. So the clothes shop was this kind of hub of people coming in and talking about music and cars and just things in general. And next door to the clothes shop was a dry cleaners, and every Saturday this guy would arrive. I never actually met him, and he had a beautiful 325 Sport with Alpina wheels, and he would park it outside the shop, and he'd go in and do whatever he had to do in the dry cleaners and then drive off. And that was really my love affair with the E30. I used to see this car every week. My mum then had a 325 Touring, and she also had a 320 Coupe. At the time, I don't really remember seeing any E30 M3s. I mean, you rarely see them on the streets now, and certainly back then there was not much change. So it was really the 325 Sport that was my sort of intro into the E30, and that was where my love affair began, I guess. At the same time, the guy that I was working for, who owned the clothes shop, had particularly good taste also, and had a very nice E9. So that was often seen in and around Manchester, very unusual, very rare to see those on the road at the time as well. So all things BMW for me. So that grinning idiot on the left is me back in 2005. So this was at the end of my army career. So I'd been in 8 years. I'd done operational tours in Northern Ireland and was involved in the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I had a great career. I was somewhat, I guess, disillusioned with what happened in Iraq, but it is what it is. So I'd made the decision to leave, and finally I'd also bought an E30 M3 in Macau blue with silver leather. That is not my car because I don't have any photos with me, but it looked pretty much exactly the same, apart from I had 17-inch BBS CH alloys on it. So my last year in the army, I had this car in Germany. I'd had a couple of E46 and was just about to order an E46 M3 because we were quite lucky that we were able to buy cars tax-free whilst we were in Germany. So I was literally right on the verge of buying one, and I think it was my brother got in touch with me and said, "Oh, by the way, we've seen this E30 M3 in," I think it was Auto Trader, which was an online, second-hand. So I had a look at it. I was due to go back to the UK and leave. I'd also just come into a little bit of money, so I had this cash burning a hole in my pocket. So I went back to the UK, caught up with my dad. We drove down, had a look at it. Deal was done, and I paid £6,500 for this thing, and it was beautiful. Not a mark on it, great condition, and enjoyed, as I said, my last year in Europe, cruising all around Europe in this Macau Blue E30 M3. So I kept it for a little while because I had this period at the end of my career where when you leave the army, you have to give 12 months notice. So I had 3 months where I was owed some leave and I was owed some courses. So I decided to go out to Hong Kong. Never been to Hong Kong before, and it was an opportunity that was a bit too good to turn down. So I kept the car in storage at the army base, went out to Hong Kong for 3 months as a kind of taster, and decided that I was going to stay there, and sold it for £7,500. Of course, always regretted it to this day ever since. So what did I end up doing next? I fell into the sort of private corporate security world. When I got to Hong Kong, there was a lot of guys there who were ex-military. The head of the Chamber of Commerce was an ex-brigadier, so he introduced me to various people. And I ended up working for an Australian group based out of Dubai that was run by ex-Special Forces officers. So I started working for them in 2007, and this was one of probably the most memorable jobs I ever did. So yes, that is a Yeti's footprint. If you Google Destination Truth and you do a bit of research around that, believe what you will, but we may have actually found some authentic footprints. They had these casts taken back to the US and checked out by the resident Bigfoot expert, and he confirmed that they were the most convincing prints he'd ever seen. So believe what you will. Fast forward to 2013, this is Juba, South Sudan. So still working for the same company. I was their kind of go-to guy for doing all kinds of random jobs, one of which was running a medical clinic in South Sudan. The culmination of which I was about to transition across to a USAID-led consortium, which was helping to organise the first elections. So South Sudan was only founded in 2011, and we were going to work for, it was a 5-year contract, 2.5 years running up to elections, and then 2.5 years follow on. And I was the sort of security director for that project. So we just got into it, everything was going well. We'd had meetings with various ministers. We were just about to go on Christmas leave, and the former vice president decided to stage a coup. So this is me having got my team together of 10 people. We'd had 4 days of pretty intense gunfire all around our compound. I got us down to the airport, and we just taxiing to get on the runway. And the military and the police take great offence if you take photos, which everybody knew, but everyone's in a slight state of shock naturally. And a couple of people took photos using their flash, and this alerted the attention of the guys on the tank. And I had to have a chat with the pilot and just suggest that he took off, which thankfully did. So after that, I decided to perhaps have a change of career, and I'm doing some. So I decided to have a change of career and do something slightly less dangerous. So during my time in South Sudan, I knew that I was going to be there for 5 years. I wanted to buy another E30 M3, and I'd been going through this kind of checklist in my mind of things that I wanted to do to it. So obviously, look at the brakes, maybe an engine upgrade, and retrim the interior. So I put together a reasonably comprehensive list of things that I wanted to do should I get another E30 M3, because if I was going to be there for 5 years, there was nothing to really spend money on, so it made sense. However, the coup put paid to that, and I then spent some time in Southeast Asia again, and caught up with a friend of mine in Kuala Lumpur, and just started to piece together or dive deeper into what this car may look like. So he was very helpful, and he suggested that I put it into a sort of business plan, a bit more formal, and that really sort of cemented in my mind what Redux could potentially become. So after 2 or 3 months there, I then went back to the UK and was catching up with some people in London, and bumped into a retired general who I'd worked very closely with in Northern Ireland when he was a brigadier. So the ex-military all-boys network is extensive globally. And just bear with me one sec. Could you close the door? So it's extensive, and he was then very helpful in pointing me in the right direction towards a group that helped ex-service personnel and setting up their own business and doing mentoring. So he then put me in touch with this group. I met with the group. The chairman made the introductions, and he then talked about his next door neighbour, who was the ex-BMW marketing director for the UK over the period of the E30 M3, so the sort of late 80s, early 90s. So obviously I requested that I met with this guy, Martin, and he then introduced me to a number of people. So the chairman of the RSC club in London, Paul Michaels, who's the founder of Hexagon Classics in London, Nick Whale, who's now Silverstone Auctions, and Steve Soper. So all of a sudden I've got access to these sort of very experienced ex-BMW guys. So I started again using them as sounding boards, bouncing some ideas off them. They gave me some feedback. And then the last guy that Martin introduced me to was a branding agency. And the founder of that branding agency had created the sort of classic 80s, 90s marketing campaigns for BMW UK. His son was now running the business, and I went to them with ideas that I had about the name and the brand. So I'd played around with a few different ideas for names and then settled on Redux, which is brought back or revived. So I thought that adequately described what it is that I was doing with the E30 M3. And then also Lightbow, which of course is German for lightweight as per the CSL, Coupe Sport Lightbow. So he came up with some different ideas for the branding and the logo, and I settled on the double R. So what we realized shortly after was, which I'd like to say we thought of this at the time, but we didn't, but it actually spells out Redux. So if you look at the gray R, the lower half of that is the E. Then if you switch over to the blue side, you've got the D, the U at the top, and then the X between the blue and the gray. And the logo, I'm really, really happy with it, and it works really well. We can shrink it right down on my car, social media, so it's instantly recognizable. There's also a kind of subtle nod there to the roundup, but I wanted to make it not blatantly obvious. So I was really happy with that. So that was the name done, that was the branding done. I'd got the kind of business plan shaped that how I wanted it. And then it was really down to the detail. So 30 M3s, it was the E30. It was also the 30th anniversary of the M3 at the time. And therefore that would be broken down into 3 batches of 9 and then a final 3. So similar to the way that BMW had done the 3 Evo models. I wanted to follow the kind of similar pattern. The tagline, again, describing we're enhancing the original car and then evolving it into something. So as Martin sort of touched on, for me, it was very clear from the start that this was something, the car had never existed, but it fitted after the Sport Evo. So in my mind, that would have been an E30 M3 CSL. So we had the E46 that came in 2004-05, and we'd had the E9 prior to that. So for me, it felt like the E30 fitted nicely in between the two, and also gave me a certain amount of artistic license. I wasn't beholden to specific things because this was my interpretation of what BMW I think they would have done. So I think it remains very respectful to the original cars. And again, there's that sort of enhancement and evolvement of the original design, particularly that you'll see in car number 2, and that's revealed later this year. And it also allowed me to tap into my OCD, which the guys are quite used to now. And as you'll see, that comes out as we progress through. So car number 1. These are some of the images. I never actually used these. So what had happened was, there's a couple of friends of mine, Jason and Nick, they've now set up a clothing company called From. So Nick does all the design work, Jason does all the business side of things. So Nick has a lot of contacts within the sort of design world. And I was looking for somebody to do some renderings for me, these ideas that I had in my head and the different options that I've been looking at. I wanted somebody to be able to translate that into some high quality renderings. My Photoshop skills were not good enough. So he introduced me to some guys in London who were ex-car designers, and we just started to kind of play around with some ideas. So this is very early on. I mean, this is February 2015. So this was me just sort of saying, well, let's use some of those references from the E46, the E9 CSL. I mean, you can see the wing mirrors here and the BBS E55 sensor locks and the twin intakes on the front bumper. So again, no significant departure from the Sportivo, but just, again, that enhance, evolve. And what I was really happy with on this particular initial rendering was this back end. So obviously the bumper is a little bit too much of a departure, but that line from the rear window surround along into the boot lid, or the trunk as you guys call it, and then down and along. The more that you look at the back end of the E30 M3, it's quite disjointed in terms of the way that the boot lid sits on the rear quarter. It's not particularly tidy. If you want to get critical of it, I understand why they needed to do it because of the rear window surround and then that taller section leading into it. But the way it tapers down. So it was something that, again, I'd looked at 5 or 6 years ago, and this is something that we've now incorporated into car number 2 and the future cars. So again, it was just picking out subtle things that we could change that was still instantly recognizable as an E30 M3, but just in a slightly more unique manner. At this point, again, through the same group, I'd also been introduced to a gentleman called John Mayhead, who works for Haggerty. So John is also an ex-army officer, ex-guards officer. So he and I had met. He lives just near Chichester, near Goodwood. So I'd gone down there. We'd met at Goodwood at the racetrack, had a cup of tea. I talked to him about what I had in mind. He was like, I'd love to write something about it. So this was, again, very early stages. So what I wasn't confident in doing was using those previous images because I wasn't sure how it was going to play out, bearing in mind how early it was in the process. So I asked the guys just to do these very quick sketches over a Sportivo, just to give an indication of ideas that we were playing around with, so that I wasn't put in a corner and, well, this is what you told us you were going to do. So these were just some very rough images that they did for me, which are the ones that we ended up using for John's article. Another interesting character that I met along the way was George Bamford. So George is the son of Lord Bamford of the JCB family. And unlike most of his siblings, George has gone on his own direction. He's not joined JCB. So he has the Bamford Watch Department, which does custom. It started off doing custom Rolexes. Now does a number of other brands, Tag, I think, and Zenith. And he's also a big car collector. So I sent a sort of speculative email to him saying, look, I read about all these articles and interviews where you talk about custom watches and custom cars. I've got something going on. I'd love to come and chat to you, which he gracefully accepted. And I went to his very swish Mayfair townhouse to have a chat with him about that. And working for him were a guy who was working on custom motorbikes, cafe races. And his business partner happened to be particularly gifted as an artist. So he very kindly did these images for me, which were then used for the Rolling Track article. So this was the sort of culmination of the work that I'd been doing in terms of creating the brand and the sort of design concepts that I had for the car, and then starting to do the initial marketing to get some attention. So for me, North America was always going to be a key market in terms of what Singer had started to do. So this was 2015, so they'd been about 5 years by that point. Of course, Eagle was well established that Martin talked about. Icon, of course, what they've been doing with the Toyotas. So John's article went out in the April, and then there was there was a number of things happening at the same time. So we had the 40th anniversary of the 3 Series, the 30th anniversary of the M3, and BMW Centenary, and that was all within roughly a 12-month period. So I knew that from a marketing perspective, this was the time to put something out there and see what the feedback was. So John's article created quite a lot of interest, which was great. I then went to Bob Sarakanich at Road and Track, who'd just done a article on the 40th anniversary of the 3 Series, and he very kindly did a piece, and then that's where we used those images for that one. And then Petrolicious, I'd spoken to Afshin a number of times, and he was very sort of supportive. And then Ted Cashew, when he was at Petrolicious, he helped put this together as well. Classic Driver also did a kind of small piece on it as well. So all of a sudden, I'd kind of I'd got to the guys that I really wanted to sort of speak with, and they'd all very kindly done an article on the car. So that generated a lot of interest, a lot of tire kickers. But actually, out of that, there's probably about 15 or 20 guys that I'd spoken to that sounded to have genuine interest in the car. So I'd put together quite a nice sort of brochure, a bit more information, some of the imagery, and sent that out to everybody. About a day or two after I'd sent the last one, I got an inquiry through the website, which was just a single line saying, I'm kind of interested in this project, with the gentleman's name and his phone number. So I thought, okay, you wouldn't necessarily put your name and your phone number if you were just being, you know, how much is it? I want one type of thing. So I sent him a reply and asked him a number of questions, and he swiftly responded and gave me a very detailed answer to my questions, and then shared some other cars that he'd had built. So we were progressing along really nicely. And he then requested that we had a call. So we had a call for maybe an hour. It's now early December 2015. And at the end of it, he said, great, fantastic. When do you want the deposit? So that was that. And he then said that he'd speak to Eric and get a donor car. Now, after the Road and Track article, I'd had Eric Keller from EAG get in touch and said, look, I'm really interested in what you're doing, love to kind of work and support you in some way if we can. So Eric and I had sort of developed a bit of a relationship by then, but still the very early stages. We now have a more sort of formal relationship whereby he looks after all the logistics, and he can source the donors, of course, all the servicing, any upgrades for North American clients. So that was to come, but initially, my first client said, I'll speak to Eric. Eric came back to me and said, look, he's a great guy. We've bought and sold him cars. I've featured before. He's, for your first client, you couldn't do much better. So that was a great start. So he found a donor, which again, we don't need anything pristine, the unicorns that EAG have on the website. We don't need anything like that. As long as it's in a pretty good condition, preferably original, no engine swap, we're good to go. And he found a good one. He shipped it out to California. We had it registered in California. And then we did it row on the way. So roll on, roll off from LA through the Panama Canal to Southampton in the UK. So we received the car in the April 2016 we're in now. So I then flew to California in the May, sat down with the client, because it was now 5 months since we'd first spoken about it. Obviously, we'd been exchanging information between the two, but this was kind of final spec time. So I went over and sat with him, and initially he was looking at the sort of CSL spec that I had in mind, i.e. Standard interior, naturally aspirated engine, etc., etc. When I actually went and sat down with him, he decided that, because he'd now got a property at Thermal Club, so he was going to spend more time on track, but not race it. He doesn't even time himself. He just spends time on the circuit with his cars, and therefore most of his cars have a roll cage just as a safety measure. So he said, I want a full cage in it. And also from a power perspective, I want it to be, up to sort of pretty much DTM 92 spec. So if you remember, they were running 370, 380 naturally aspirated, which for a customer car. So when I'd had dinner with Steve Soper, we talked about this, and he said, yeah, you know, we were rebuilding those engines every 4 hours. So that was obviously impractical for a customer car. So we talked through options, and we decided that a turbo was probably the best option, just because it could deliver the power, and there was the lineage with that M10 block with the Megatron F1 engine, of course, and the 2002. So it wasn't entirely unrealistic that this could have been an option. And I think Dynan in period, I think they ended up doing 5 or 6 cars with a kind of authorized turbo S14. Anyway, so he was happy with that. I was happy. I went away, and we'd kind of redone some of the design work, and again, just little features. We'd got the cage in by this time, and we were ready to start. So that was May 2016. And fast forward, so here was the finished product in February 2019. Now, anybody who's ever done anything like this will know that the first thing that you do is never the most straightforward. And this was certainly the case with car number 1. The turbo engine was not a significant issue, but we were very concerned about cooling, because it was going to be in California, and we knew that it would get hot, and to try and recreate that in the UK is almost impossible. So we'd gone for the radiator was at least 50% bigger than standard. We'd gone for a larger intercooler. We'd gone very conservative on the boost, so we were running 14 psi on boost, so it was pretty low. We'd gone very conservative mapping on the engine, but we still hit 390 horsepower, 390 foot-pounds of torque quite comfortably. So it also had a straight through 3-inch exhaust. It did have the option to, there was a section that we could drop out and put the carb cats in if you wanted to do emission tests for it. But there's a huge amount went into the car, which was not necessarily obvious. The other thing that it didn't have was any journalist driver, and that was on the request of the client. So I respected that. But if you begin to look at, these are some of the images that EAG took, which have not been seen before. So the interior, as an example, took 5.5 months. And the reason being because I wanted it still to have a more road car feel, but have the safety of the full cage. So it wasn't an FIA spec cage. We were not beholden to certain regulations, but it needed to be safe. So obviously that was a huge amount of work. So the A-pillars, they're all handmade and hand-shaped around and we'd push the sort of cage right into the A-pillar on the door so that you didn't have to step in and over a cage. The roll cage runs under the door, in that channel under the door. So all that you see are the crossbars in the rear for the harness. And there's a lot of detail in there. So there was a lot of people asking about why we'd gone with a Motec dash. The reason is his eyesight's not great, and he doesn't use his glasses when he's on the track with his helmet. So therefore we needed something that was very bright, and if there was a problem, it would flash very clearly and you could pull into the pits and get it looked at. I'd had an analog dash remade, I had a new circuit board, new PCB done, and we just couldn't get that amount of information. So the car runs full Motec, so we've got the Motec. On this one, it was the M150 ECU and 2 PDMs. So the Motec dash was the obvious option. I'd tried, as I said, tried the analog, and I just wasn't getting the information that I wanted. So that's why we went with the Motec dash. It's got the quick release wheel. That's an Ital Volante 4mm wheel. We've also got a smaller track wheel, but then it's still fully trimmed Alcantara. As you can see on the headliner, they're actually Z3 visors, just because we had to change the shape of the headliner to fit the cage in at the top. It's running a carbon roof. The stickers in the door that you see, they're actually redone by a guy that I know in the UK. So they replicate the original fonts of the BMW stickers, but have the correct tire sizes on and tire pressures, and my logo's been incorporated into it as well. So a huge amount of detail went into the interior, and we're also running the AP pedals on there, and the BMW Motorsport Golf ball, not a Golf Mark 1, which a lot of people thought it was. And also you can see there where the cigarette lighter is, that's the brake bias for the pedals as well. That's the rear. I don't think anybody's seen this before, but again, huge amount of work gone into that to make it look relatively simple. So that's all serviceable, that all comes out, and it's all on BMW clips. Under that bench section is a lot of the electronics as well. So it kind of tidies up all the electronics. And then, so I'd flown in, so we'd finished the car in early December 2018. We shipped it out again 4 or 5 weeks. The client had very kindly waited to drive it until I got there in February, and then we spent 4 or 5 days doing some track testing and doing the setup. A few little things that we had to adjust, and one of the brakes locked up, and other little kind of gremlins to just iron out. So at the end of that, really happy. Had these great photos done by Drew Phillips at Thermal. And then was very fortunate that Top Gear ran with it straight away. It was on the front of their website for 2 or 3 weeks, I think. So they're very keen to follow up on number 2. Petrolicious, again, they ran with it straight away. Evo Magazine, Classic Driver, BMW Blog. So all the guys that I wanted to kind of run with it very kindly did so. So again, a huge amount of interest, and that then secured car number 2. So car number 2 is the spec that I always had in mind. So it's road car, it's full interior, naturally aspirated, S14. And also I'm now in the fortunate position that I can indulge in some of the things that I just couldn't afford to do on the first car, i.e. the carbon fiber. So this was the donor car. I'd been approached by an English guy living in Abu Dhabi who had this in Abu Dhabi, really clean, nice condition. I then got back in touch with him in the March when we confirmed the sale of number 2. He'd shipped it back to the UK, and it was by coincidence 10 minutes from the workshop. So the guys went to have a look at it. They confirmed that it was in great condition, perfect. Again, not pristine, but not a wreck. And it gave us a few months. So we didn't start it straight away because there was a number of changes that I'd instigated after the first car, just how we'd operate. And I brought in some new people to work on various aspects of the car as well. So we had the kickoff meeting in August, and so far so good. So when you look at the original car there, the only thing that is not pre-preg carbon now is the door skins and the roof. And the only reason the roof isn't carbon is because the client wanted to retain, it's got an electric sunroof, so he wanted to keep the sunroof. So this car will be staying in the UK. But we can do, so what we've decided to do now, instead of just a normal kind of panel that you get for these cars, is we're going to do as an option. So it'll be the whole roof all the way back to the rear window surround, the A-pillars and the scuttle. So it'll be a single piece. And of course we can do carbon door skins as well. So we started all the carbon last June. So I was in, COVID actually worked out quite well for me, unlike most people, whereby the guys that are producing all the carbon for me, they do a lot of work with the F1 teams, which of course the season was postponed. They do a lot of work with Aston and McLaren as well. So we had this window of opportunity where we could bring forward my work. So they started this in the beginning of June last year. It was all shaped by hand, and there's 17 new parts. So I've just described the only parts that aren't carbon on this one. So these are the first ones out of the autoclave. So the new rear bumper. As you can see, I've retained the original fixing points for the sort of underbody surround parts by BMW. So we still do use quite a lot of original or new original parts from BMW. And then we're also gradually working through parts that are NLA or parts that I just think now need an upgrade. We're going through that process, but I mean, you can see the level of detail that they do. This is the inside of the bumper, and they've, you know, they're matching the weave. So the work that they produce is really quite impressive. The new rear window surround, there's a few little adjustments on this, but that's not significantly different than the original. But again, bearing in mind that's the inside that nobody will ever see. It's a pretty nice piece of kit. So we're also doing a lot of new billet parts now. So this is the new valve cover. What I wanted to do was on the bottom edge is just tidy up. So instead of having all the wiring loose and just kind of banded together, that bottom section, the top is removable. So the wiring looms comes in at the top left corner and then feeds into the coils. So a lot tidier. This is a wet sump engine, so it will retain the oil filler, which is now been added. This is quite an early rendering that was done on CAD. And then it obviously features some design work, which I'm not quite going to share with you yet, but safe to say it's looking pretty awesome. Some new wheels. So the guys that did the DTM wheels on the first car is an Italian company. So I'd actually been having quite a lot of discussions with BBS Motorsport. And if anyone's ever dealt with BBS Motorsport, they're good guys, but they're not really, they don't really need to change what they do. And I was looking to do some subtle design changes, which they frankly weren't that interested in. So I went back to Chanel and said, look, can you take your original wheel and just make some subtle changes for me, which they've now done. So this will be exclusive to my car, and really pleased with how that's come out. Again, very subtle, but makes quite a significant difference. XTC. So these guys are the unsung heroes in many respects, and they don't always get the credit they deserve. So just to put it into context, XTC made Sebastian Loeb all his suspension for his 9 World Rally Championship winning cars. So that was their heritage, very much in rally cars. They also did the suspension for Chris Harris's Kermit 911, which was pre-Singer. Chris Harris obviously has a very close relationship with Singer. So they now have done the dampers for the Singer DLS, the $2 million Singer DLS, and they've also done, I'm sure many of you watched the interview that Top Gear did with Richard Tuthill about the ACS. That was also XTC suspension, and sadly they didn't get a mention that I saw on that interview. So I would like to give a shout to Rob and Ed on the engineering side, and Julia and Luke, who now run the business. Really good guys, make beautiful dampers, and these are again a special damper for my car. They're not quite as if you've seen the dampers on the first car, they was somewhat more robust because it was mainly doing track work as well. This of course is a road damper. Again, more billet parts. This is in the center console, so we're retaining what looks like the ashtray, but this will have some control pads in it for other features in the car. And then we'd also done, I think I was saying about NLA parts. So, for example, the wiper stalks, they're now NLA. So, of course, after 30 years use, they're pretty much warm, smooth. So we've got those now in billets. Elements of the center console and the dash. So yeah, number 2 is going to be quite a significant difference from number 1. Going back to my OCD, so this is my Redux logo in perforations, and of course it has to have 30 perforations. So this will feature in various aspects of the interior. And actually, look, it works really nice again because it will shrink right down small, but you can still recognize the logo with the perforations. So looking forward to getting the first test samples done of that shortly. And then just to finish off, I'll just run through. So I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with the build process for these cars, and this is exactly the same as the likes of Singer's doing, of course Eagle's doing. So we use a combination of We use crushed glass and pyrolysis, which is heat, to take the shell back to the bare metal. There's quite a lot of fabrication here because we're using, particularly in the engine bay, where we're using different parts than originally. The engine, just to confirm that this will be naturally aspirated 2.5, we're looking at probably 275, 300 horsepower, something like that. From a weight perspective, I'm aiming to try and get her down to, I'd like to try and get down to about 1125 if we're working at 1200 kilos. Sorry, my conversion to pounds, I should have checked this before I started working kilos. So if the original car is 1200 kilos, I'm looking to save around about 75, 50 to 75. I've already saved 12 kilos just on the battery by using the light blocks battery, because that weighs 2 kilos, 4.4 pounds. Electronics, Motec again, and then we do the paint, the interior trim, all in-house. The only thing that we're not doing is the PPF, which I'll come on to now. So even from number one, there's a significant number of new parts and upgrades now. And this is effectively the first production car. Number one was very much the prototype. It was quite an unusual combination of spec. I'd be surprised if we did one to that spec again. So for me, this is kind of setting, this is the benchmark now of how all the other cars will be based. So again, the AP system, slightly bigger front disc on this one. We're using 362 on the front now, 315 on the rear. I've mentioned all the carbon fiber, the 2.5 litre normally aspirated. Motec, we're running an M130 ECU this time and two PDM30s, full rake M looms with auto sport connectors. And every other aspect from the mechanical aspect, the front and rear assemblies, there's a lot of kind of subtle adjustments there, taking into consideration some of what happened on the Group A cars. But again, this is a road car, so it needs to be comfortable, not too harsh. A lot of work on the interior trim, which will become apparent when you see it. So again, full leather interior, lots of Alcantara. And then I'm using Topaz Detailing. So some of you may be familiar with these guys in the UK. They are, I would say, the premier detailers and PPF application company in the UK now. So they're based in London. They've got another one in Bristol, and I think they're due to open one in Geneva. So I have an arrangement with them where all the production cars will now go to them, and they've created, or they will create for me, a custom. They've got their own version called Topaz Skin, so it's self-healing, UV protective, kind of top of the range PPF now. There'll also be some ceramic protection on there on top as well. Wheels I mentioned with Chanel again, and then tyres, I'm using Michelin tyres now. So I was having a conversation. They have it's really quite interesting. They have a kind of niche department that deals with low volume manufacturers. So the likes of Gordon Murray for his new T50, Singer, Koenigsegg. So I was introduced by the director of Koenigsegg in Dubai. So really good, really interesting, very supportive. So so pleased to be using Michelin tyres. And then just to round off, this list just keeps growing. So obviously with my background on a sound engineering side, happy to work with customers on sort of really nice audio setups. We're using the Blaupunkt, the new Bremen SQR, which is the kind of old, new looking Blaupunkt head unit. From an engine perspective, we can now do a full billet engine to our spec. Lots of interior trim parts I've talked about. We've got an aero package that's an addition. I mentioned about the skin and the roof. Full carbon ceramic discs and pads. If you want to do a bit more track work as well as road, XTC do offer a four-way adjustable damper if the three ways aren't quite good enough. Full and Canal exhaust system, and on and on. So the reality is this will continue to evolve as the cars do. So there's always the option that if people wanted new parts as they come through, we can then fit as upgrades as we progress. So what's next? More of the same. So as I said, there will only be 30 E30 M3s, but that's not to say Redux stops there. So I'll leave that with you for now and watch this space. And that's it from me. I think that's pretty much bang on 45 minutes. So happy to answer questions. I think Martin's going to act as a kind of moderator for that. There's certain things I'm not going to talk about, so don't ask me about cost of the car yet. Don't ask me about spec of number 2, because I'd like to wait until it's unveiled, which will be, assuming the events go ahead, first weekend in July this year. So I want to kind of keep you in anticipation until that point, instead of sharing everything. I'm very conscious that a lot of cars that you see everything, and then when it's unveiled, you're like, yeah, I've kind of seen it all before. So I'm just going to hold back on that information for now. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And I should mention that Simon joined us today. He's currently in Dubai. So the time in Dubai right now is going on for 10 o'clock at night. So we really appreciate you taking the time late in the evening.
I'm very happy to. No problem at all.
So the first question is the one that you said that you weren't going to answer, which is how much. So different, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the honest answer is, by virtue of what we're doing with number 2, I have a very understanding client, thankfully. So I want to just wait until we've finished it, and then I can confirm all the costs. Obviously, I've got a pretty good idea, but I think the reality is you can use your common sense if you're having a custom-made car built over an 18-month period. If you're looking at what Singer are charging now, where they started, I think you've got a pretty good idea where this is going to end up. The likes of Gunther Works, similar thing as well. So it's a labour of love. I mean, there's, as I like to think, you've now seen there's a huge amount of work goes into this. This is not just swapping out new brakes and wheels and doing an interior trim. We're doing a lot of re-engineering, and it's only going to increase as we do more of the cars.
Right. So how long, what's the timeline for the second car? When did it actually start, and when do you expect it to be finished? How long does it actually take, this process?
So we started in August 2019. Obviously, this one will take a little bit longer than the other production cars by virtue of having the carbon bodywork done. I've told the guys that I want this finished by early June this year. Then we can do 3 or 4 weeks testing on road and some track work. And then there's a number of events that I want to unveil the car at. So there's provisionally one in Italy, which we're waiting for confirmation of, Goodwood Festival of Speed, and then Monterey Car Week. So that's July and August. So that's the timelines that we're working to.
Do you have orders for other cars after this?
I have a lot of people who are genuinely interested, most of which want to see car number 2 because this is the production car. So some of those I'm going to get in to have a look before we do the official unveil. Others want to wait until they can see it in the flesh at Goodwood or in Monterey.
So that's obviously going to be a pretty big deal. Have you thought about taking any of the parts that you're making and doing longer production runs and offering those as a sideline? Somebody was asking, for example, about if you were making entire engines from billet, but things like the valve cover, would that be something you consider for?
It's not out of the realms of possibility at the moment. No. So I made the decision that we would only be creating the parts for Redux vehicles. There may be some parts that we look offering as a kind of additional run, but at the moment, no.
Okay.
Because again, if you're spending the type of money on this car, for me, it's important that it has lots of unique features on it that are special to the 30 cars. And then also, as I say, with the premium options, making it even more personalized by, digging into particular features that we can create for the clients, whether it's out of billet, whether it's out of carbon, creating a unique cloth or leather design or whatever it is. So it's absolutely about the personalization of the cars. And therefore, I want people to feel that they're special to them.
Right. And that's entirely consistent with what Singer and Eagle and others do. You can't call up Singer and ask for a pair of seats for your 911 or anything like that. So
yeah, exactly. I know. As I didn't mention this, but I was Paul Brace from Eagle. He got in touch very early on, so he very kindly asked if I wanted to go down and have a look at Eagle's factory, which was fascinating. So it's at Henry Berman's house, effectively, and they have these number of outbuildings, and they do the whole production run in there. So as you say, I mean, they create beautiful vehicles. They'd just done the first low drag when I went down to see them, and yeah, same thing. You know, you can't just buy a pair of seats off Eagle either. So I think for me, having seen what Eagle are doing, Singer continuing to set the benchmark, if I wish to be included into that exclusive group, then to me it's a no-brainer. You know, it has to be equally as exclusive. And I think the fact that, as you touched on earlier, the price that Sportivos are commanding now has signified that the E30 M3 is here to stay as a genuine classic. We certainly don't need a Sportivo as a donor, as I said. You know, this car number 2 is an 86, so it's one of the very early cars. But to me, it kind of reinforces that these are a very special car anyway, and my intention is to make it even more special.
So one of the things that you mentioned earlier was you used the example of the indicator, the turn signal stalk, and the wiper stalk, and how those parts are no longer available. I imagine that one of the challenges that you have with a project like this is parts availability. Have you come across any good sources for stock parts that are either NLA or in very limited availability that you could refer any members to?
Yes, but no. So
you want them for yourself first, right?
So I have I have a very close relationship with a couple of BMW dealers. So I was genuinely surprised. So real OEM is my kind of default setting now. So I was surprised at how many parts you could still get from BMW dealers. So as I say, we do use a lot of parts that it's just simple to replace. But yes, there are some NLA parts. So I do have a very good parts guy in the UK who is able to source hard to find. He has a stock himself at his house, which is quite extensive. But the reality is, particularly on this car, I made the decision, well, look, we may as well just start making our own parts. So there's certain things that are NLA that we're just making, and then actually a lot of other things that, as I said to you, we're looking at and just going, well, we may as well just make those ourselves now, particularly with the options for billet.
So if somebody was interested after this presentation in becoming or discussing the possibility of becoming a Redux customer, here in the US, would they talk to EAG or would they talk to you directly? What's the process?
So the process is, I recently added a couple of pages onto the website. So there's a frequently asked questions page on there now. And at the bottom of that is a list of those initial questions that I generally ask people. So that's a good place to start. So they can come through the website, which obviously then comes to me. I will do all the discussions around client spec and everything on that side. EAG is then, once a car has been built, it goes to North America, they would then become the point of contact for, as I say, servicing, maintenance, if you wanted any track prep, any upgrades, etc., etc. I mean, you can certainly speak to Eric and ask him, and then Eric would just come back to me as well. So, but I do all the client liaison and anything related to the cars from that perspective.
And I did in the chat, if anybody doesn't have the chat window open for questions, but I did put a link in there to the Redux website for everybody who's here.
Okay, thank you.
We got it's 1 o'clock here now, so we're getting ready to finish up. But just a question a couple of people have asked is, what next? any thoughts about future or other BMW models that you might want to pursue a similar philosophy with?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
And can you tell?
No. But yeah, I've got one in particular. But yeah, around that sort of era, there's I think there's at least 2 or 3 that are kind of ripe for another Redux review. So we're already beginning that process of, okay, which one of those should be the next one to go. So yeah, there will certainly be more, no question. And again, I think it's just fascinating looking at the way in which, because I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, every generation goes through this. Every generation has particular cars that they look at and go, I can't believe people are paying that much for them. You know, we were talking about Ferrari 250 GTOs when you see those adverts from the 60s for, you know, $10,000 or whatever they were. You know, we were talking about Sportivos, 2005, they were £18,000 in the UK. So we've all gone through it. And I think it's just, it reminds us that the emotional attachment we have to these cars, hence why people are prepared to spend $250,000 on a Sportivo. And I'm just delighted the way in which this niche has evolved. Because when I first started to speaking to some of these people, as I said, back in 2015, so Paul Michaels, who is, what's he in now, 60s, 70s, you know, to him, it was kind of a bits of car. So bits of this and bits of the other. Oh, he said, oh, you just put new brakes on it. And I said, well, no, there's much more to it than that. And I think, again, thank you to Eagle and thank you to Singer for the way that they've trailblazed, making people understand that this is much more than just adding new parts to an old car. You know, there's a significant amount of thought and care and passion that goes into creating something that, you know, we're very proud of. And I would like to think that once your guys see it in the flesh, fingers crossed at Monterey, and I can do the same sort of thing, but do a kind of walk through, talk through with the car physically there. And I can just give you an insight into the process that we've been through to get to this stage. Because I mean, that was the irony. I was thinking about this earlier, that you know, me getting out of South Sudan, trying to do something less stressful, and then jumping into building a car that I've never done before was actually significantly more stressful than potentially being shot at by warmongering South Sudanese for a few days. So it's, but it's a very satisfying process when, you know, when you get to that point and you hand over the keys and then you do some laps in it and it all works out well. You forget about all those sleepless nights that you've had because somebody's not delivered a part or somebody's let you down, or all the usual stuff that we go through when you're doing something like this. So really happy with the team that I've got now. We've got a really good process in place. The quality of the work that the guys are producing is exceptional. The carbon work is beautiful. So yeah, really excited. And I think I forgot to mention I don't know if I said on the carbon that we can of course do exposed weave. So if somebody got to the point where they wanted full carbon exposed weave with the nicely, you know, matching chevrons, no problem at all. We can do all that.
Very nice. So
yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the education and for the sales pitch. I'm sure you're going to be overwhelmed now with the requests, and you might need to consider doing more than 30 cars.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be Mr. Pagani and doing a Zonda and then a final 5 Zonda and then maybe a special 3 Zonda. And so yeah, no, listen, happy to chat to you guys. My email was on there, or just send a message to the website, and happy to chat to people.
Great. Thank you again. I really appreciate your time. I just
No,
have a couple of things to finish up with. Just everybody who's attended, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this and your appetite has been whetted for a very, very special E30 M3. To stay in the loop on Simon's company and the cars as they evolve, we posted the link in the chat, as well as links to the Facebook page and to the Instagram account for Redux. As far as the M chapter is concerned, we hope you've enjoyed this presentation. We have other presentations coming up in the future. Next month, we'll be talking with Haggerty about the state of the M car collector market. And Dave Kinney and Greg Ingold from Haggerty will be giving us sharing their knowledge as far as that's concerned. And then in March, the folks from EAG, Eric Keller, will be talking with us about EAG and their business model, their raison d'etre, and possibly some additional insight into Redux at that point as well. So hopefully that's all been enjoyable. Please join the M chapter if you haven't already at mchapter.org. You, as a BMW CCA member, you can join us as your primary chapter, or I strongly recommend that you consider joining us at least as a secondary chapter in addition to your local chapter, to stay plugged into both local as well as the national events like this that we're offering in the M chapter. So once again, thank you all very much for attending, and we'll look out for you next week. Simon, thank you again. And
just a final thing,
please.
Martin. I do a monthly newsletter, so if you go onto the website on the contact page, you can subscribe to the monthly newsletter, and then you just get updates as to where we're up to. So,
perfect.
Thank you.
As a subscriber, I can say that I look forward to those every month.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Everyone, stay well, and look forward to seeing you in August. Fingers crossed, all being well.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.